Hello, friends. Welcome back to my YouTube channel and welcome to Chat with the Author. This is something that I do generally once per week. I started Chat with the Author, I'd say a couple of months ago, and my name is Michelle Fondin. I am the published author of 11 published books, including this book that we're going to talk about today, The Empowered Divine Feminine, Becoming an Unstoppable Woman in the 21st Century and Beyond. Today, we're going to talk about the global shift toward the divine feminine. This is something that is real, even though it might not even seem real at this particular moment in time. In fact, it may even seem like it is the polar opposite of the shift toward the divine feminine. But I assure you, I am not the only one who is saying this. In order to start with this, there's something I need to say about my writing process. And I think if you're watching this live, if you're watching this on replay, it's really important for you to understand that I write a lot of spiritually based books. And even though some of my books are well researched, most of the time, if not 99% of the time, I am writing from a meditative state. And so my books are channeled directly from spirit. That is the way I write. It's always been the way I've written since book one and even prior to book one, because I wrote many books that are unpublished prior to that. I was writing works of fiction prior to ever being a published author. And that is exactly the way I write. So The Empowered Divine Feminine, as being a channeled work, of course, it's researched as well, but mostly channeled work. And it's really based on my personal experience, but experience with many of my clients, which are mostly female. And I'd say 10% male, but mostly female. And there is this global shift. It's funny. I was watching, I'd never even heard of this person. I think his name is Michael Sandler. Inspire Nation is his YouTube channel. Again, he popped up on my feed. I had never heard of the guy before, and he was doing something post-election, and I just popped it on because I was like, I don't even know who this person is. But it's really interesting because he said the exact same thing. He said, there's a global shift toward the divine feminine. I'm like, aha. I wrote a whole book on this. So my writing process is channeled. My writing process is in a very meditative state. I get myself into a highly meditative state. I've been meditating for years and years and years and years, since 2007. And so that is my writing process. And I think that's important for you to understand, because I'm not just pulling this out of my bottom end. And so what does that mean? Like, it's really important also for you to understand, like, what does that mean? We are in a global shift toward the divine feminine. What I write about in the book, The Empowered Divine Feminine, is that since the dawn of recorded history, right? We don't really know what was happening before recorded history, but since the dawn of recorded history, we've been in a patriarchy, right? So how long has that been since recorded history? I don't know. You tell me. I've been reading these ancient Vedic texts, these Indian spiritual texts that were first written down, and that were on the first century AD, or what is it? Common Era, CE now, that's what it's called. But I've been reading these ancient Vedic texts that are from like 2000 years BCE. And they were not written down until the first century, but they were around. They were passed down from teacher to student. We know that there's like wall drawings, cave drawings. There are there's Egyptian hieroglyphs that were messages. Of course, that was written down. So if you think about it, since recorded history, so let's say the past 2000 years plus, maybe 4000 years, we've been in the patriarchy. We have absolutely positively been in the patriarchy, which has meant that it's been masculine dominated, which all of you know this. It's been male dominated, which most of you know this. And there's never been an extreme dominance of feminine in our recorded history. And so as long as we know, as far as we know, it's always been the patriarchy. And since the last century, so since the early 1900s, a little bit before then, but really since the early 1900s, that has slowly started to shift. It slowly started to shift into feminine dominance, if you will. But what I talk about in my book that I channeled, and one of the reasons why we saw this explosion of divine feminines awakening to the twin flame journey around 2017, 2018, we saw this enormous explosion. I was there watching it because my YouTube channel was rising to prominence as I spoke about this journey. And so I had the great advantage of talking to people from all over the world in every corner of the planet. I really had this bird's eye view of what was happening because I was talking to so many of you. And so it was an incredible time for me to really understand this explosion of awakening of the divine feminine. And I was like, I didn't even know what the divine feminine meant. But I saw this explosion around the world in people who had no idea what they were experiencing. And so I was able to see it back in 2019 when I started doing my coaching. And it was incredible because I had looked up Divine Feminine 2018. Not a lot was coming out. Not a lot was out there. But then you just fast forward 6 months from then, maybe mid 2019, pretty soon you had thousands and thousands of videos talking about the Divine Feminine. And so when we talk about that, we're not talking about the twin flame journey at all. That is absolutely not what we're talking about in this video, nor that is not what I talk about in this book at all. I mentioned it a few times, but that's not what this is about. The global shift to the divine feminine is like the yin yang symbol. It is not, how should I say this? It's not personal. So, hey, hello, Hayoka Twin 1111. Aw, thank you so much for reading my book. I really appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. So appreciate you. Thank you very much. I'm gonna give you some hearts there. So yeah, it's not at all about the twin flame journey. What it really is about is the yin, think of the yin yang symbol, right? And I explain that in my book, the principle, according to Taoism, of yin yang. So they're the masculine principle, the feminine principle, the dark principle, the light principle. And it's just that everything on earth has this duality. But when we talk about the global shift, and in my book, I talk about this, that we have been in the patriarchy for all of recorded human history. And now things are beginning to shift. Things are beginning to change. And it's not personal, right? It's not personal against men. It's not personal against the patriarchy. It's not at all that. We think it might be that, right? So when women started to have more rights, rightfully so, as I always say, rightfully so. But in the early 20th century, when women started to have more rights, it became personal, right? It was like this personal quest against men, against the patriarchy, to have the same rights, right? Equal as men. But this whole global shift is a spiritual shift. It has nothing to do with anything personal. It's just that according to the yin yang theory, if one energy is dominant, the other energy must rise up. That's just the way it goes, right? We have day and night, light and dark. It's always a balance. And when things get terribly imbalanced, as it has been with the male dominance, with the patriarchy, it has been incredibly imbalanced. Spirit, the world, the universe, nature rises up to balance it out. Okay, so the rising of the divine feminine, I'll explain in a minute why I call it the divine feminine, but the rising up of the divine feminine, or women in prominence on earth, is happening, again, not against the patriarchy, not against men, but because it's the natural way of things. It's the natural way of things to have this shift, because that is the balance of the entire universe. That is the way the world works. It works in balance. And when we get terribly imbalanced, the other side rises up. That's all that happens. We live in this world of duality. And as we see this, we see the shift. We see the shift happening. We know the shift is happening. We feel the shift is happening. And as we feel this shift happening, what is also happening is that the other side of things, so the yang side of things, the masculine side of things, the patriarchy side of things, is gripping on for dear life to not give up that prominence. Now, that's just the human side of us, right? That has nothing to do with the spiritual side. The spiritual side is we got to balance things out here. We got to balance. The yin has to rise up, the yang has to lower down. That's just the way of the world. And so because we are human, we have free will, we have strong will. And the way of yang is through will, through sheer power and will and action. That's the way of yang. Yang is going to hold on for dear life, right? It's going to hold on for dear life. And so that is just the way of things. That's why when I say the divine feminine era is among us, the divine feminine era is here. We just don't see it 100% out of the open yet, but it is absolutely positively here. The rising of the divine feminine is rising more rapidly than you can even conceive of. But at the same token, the masculine, the patriarchy, the lower masculine, not the higher masculine, not the divine masculine, the lower masculine is holding on for dear life. Holding on for dear life. And so that's why we see what we see in the world today, with the patriarchy knowing it's dying, knowing that it doesn't fit anymore, knowing that this formula doesn't work as people are ascending into higher spiritual energy. It's trying the system, the patriarchy, those that have been part and parcel of it historically, are trying to hold on for dear life. And that's why you're seeing it become stronger in some sense. It's not that it's becoming stronger. It's that the will to hold on to the power that is no longer there, that is becoming stronger, right? Hey, Tom, thanks for introducing yourself. I really appreciate it. So that is what we're seeing here. That is exactly what we're seeing. Now let's talk a little bit about divine feminine versus the lower feminine, the way I delineate it in the book, The Empowered Divine Feminine. So, what I would say is, even if you are a man, you have women in your life. You probably have a mother, sister, girlfriend, best friend who might be a woman. They could definitely benefit from reading this. And even I feel like men benefit from understanding this energy dynamic. Because when I talk about the rising of the, okay, when we get into our lower vibrational energies as women, because now we're talking about the feminine versus the masculine, the yin versus the yang, right? That's what we're talking about, the energy dynamic, the dualistic dynamic, right? When we talk about that, we're talking about the feminine principle, which most oftentimes is talking about women who were girls born female into female bodies. And the reason I'm being so specific is because the energy dynamic of the patriarchy is felt by women who were born as girls. Like, that is what has been felt throughout these centuries. Okay. So I understand we have both energies. We're not debating that. We're not debating the fact that we both possess both energies. Okay. That's not up for debate. We know this. But for women who were born as young girls, we have been taught to operate in lower vibrational frequencies because that's the way we had to cope. And so since we were born and raised into these lower feminine frequencies, it was like an uphill battle all the time. It was like we were climbing a mountain that never ended. We were climbing a ladder that literally had no top. And it was like, as soon as we climbed the next rung, it felt like the ladder was getting taller. And because of that, women throughout recorded history, because remember, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the dynamic since recorded history, when we know that it has always been the patriarchy. So since women had to learn coping mechanisms to deal with the greater force of the patriarchy, they were also operating in the lower feminine. So remember, the patriarchy is lower masculine, not divine masculine, not higher vibrational masculine. But the dynamic, the energy dynamic between the patriarchy and what women were living up until now was the lower feminine. Because instead of rising up high above into the divine feminine, which nobody really understood that vibration until recently. Some people did, right? But it was almost an anomaly when that happened. It was abnormal when that happened. But because the patriarchy did not exist in the divine, right? The patriarchy exists in the very low vibrations of the masculine. What women had to do to climb the rungs of the ladder to try to get some leverage into getting the rights, the equal, whatever, right? Whatever it happened to be, to get the right to have a bank account. They had to lower themselves to that lower vibrational frequency of the patriarchy in order to do so. And what that turned out to be were coping mechanisms, right? So coping mechanisms like lying, hiding, playing the guilt complex, having the victim mentality. So they had to go into all of those lower vibrational frequencies to make do and to cope. And this has been learned behavior for centuries and centuries and centuries and centuries. Now take those lower vibrational frequencies of the lower feminine, again, to match the vibrational frequencies of the lower masculine, and now try to switch that. Try to change that. Now, suddenly, try to change that. It's very challenging to do. It's difficult to do. And hence the reason I believe why women, a lot of women, have awakened to the divine feminine journey, because of that instantaneous awakening that was taking them into that higher vibrational frequency without them really knowing what it was. But that's a preparation phase, right? It's a preparation to live in those higher vibrations. Now, that doesn't resolve the fact that we need to shed the habits. I'm going to call it habits. We need to shed the habits of the lower feminine, because we actually do, right? We need to shed the habits of the lower feminine in order to rise up into the highest frequencies. And it's when we as a general collective, right? It's when we as a general collective rise up into those higher vibrational frequencies and stay there while shedding the lower feminine frequencies, shedding them, one of them being victim mentality, right? When we shed those lower vibrational feminine frequencies that we've been in for centuries and centuries and centuries, and we remain more or less, right? More or less in the higher vibrational frequencies, then guess what? The patriarchy will start to crumble down, and you'll see it happen faster and faster and faster. And the reason is something that is resonating at such a low vibrational frequency cannot remain in power when there is half the population in a higher vibrational frequency. So we're talking about women and men, right? We're not talking anything political, nothing like that. We're just talking between women and men. And so the patriarchy can't remain when so many are resonating at such a high vibrational frequency. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, wow, that's like a pipe dream, right? How could that even happen? I'm just telling you that it's step by step by step. And it's, if you are a divine feminine person, if you are a woman living in society today and you're attracted to this material, this video, this conversation surrounding the empowered divine feminine, you can do it. You can absolutely positively do it. And you're being called to do it. You are absolutely being called to shed the lower feminine frequencies. And in the book, I outline exactly how to do that. But intuitively, you know how to do it. You know what feels right to remain in your higher vibrational frequencies. Now, one of the ways is not to fight the masculine, not to fight the patriarchy. Because as soon as you move into that energy of like, I need to fight against the patriarchy and all the crazy ass rules that they're making, you're entering into that lower vibrational frequency to do that. You are lowering yourself to that same vibration that the patriarchy has been dishing out for centuries and centuries and centuries and centuries. Okay. And again, we're not blaming anyone for this. And that is one other thing that I would really love for you to pick up on here. We're not blaming the patriarchy. Okay. We are absolutely positively not blaming the patriarchy. In this book, so I have two versions. This is the black cover version. This is the one I had previously. And this is the new cover, which I thought was bigger and better and more representative of divine feminine. But I was bookmarking the page in this book. I called it the age-old dance of the masculine and feminine. The age-old dance of the masculine and feminine. Now, to close this off, I'm going to tell a little bit of a story to give you perspective on something that was intriguing to me as I was watching some movies and some shows these last few weeks. I just adopted a new kitten. This kitten is crazy with energy. And so I'm not able to get a whole lot of work done because I'm trying to moderate between the older cat, who is much calmer, and this crazy energetic kitten. So I've been watching some shows and playing with the kitten. But let's talk about the age-old dance of the masculine and feminine. And I think this will help you as you're pondering why we're seeing this craziness with the masculine, with the patriarchy in the world at large today. When it seems like the patriarchy is getting stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. You're like, what's happening here? And it's really not. It's just an illusion. It's because it's crumbling down. And so something that's crumbling down is going to feel like it's getting stronger before it crumbles, right? It's just like a great big earthquake, right? It feels very strong, right? Before it, subsides. So the age-old dance of the masculine and feminine, we need to keep something in perspective here. Until very recently, very, 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 very recently, we're talking the early 1900s. So think of all of humanity, all the history of Homo sapiens, right? So modern humans have been around about 10,000 years. Modern, we're talking about modern humans. About 10,000 years. It's been only in the last 100, what are we, 2024? In the last 124 years, give or take 10 years on either side of that year 1900, it's only been 124 years out of 10,000 years of Homo sapiens. Only, think about that. 124 years. And I'm being generous there. I'm being really generous with that 124 years. I'd say probably closer to 100, but let's give it what it's worth. 124 years. Have we, as societies, been developed enough that we can be self-sufficient in a way where we have an infrastructure that is set up for self-sufficiency? Okay, let me repeat that again. Just in the last 124 years, or let's say since the year 1900, have we been in societies that have an infrastructure around self-sufficiency. Before, we did not. Okay? So as we're pondering the patriarchy, as we're pondering feminism, let's put that into perspective. 124 years, that is it. Before then, what was happening? And that's why I talk about the age-old dance. Hey, Mike, how are you? That's why I talk about the age-old dance of the masculine and feminine. Okay, so think about, we've only been self-sufficient as males and females, as women and men, since the year 1900. Before that, it was like the wild, wild west, anywhere you went. Okay, it was like anything goes. Yes, they had laws, but you heard of the laws? I mean, people look at you, say you're a witch, you get hung, right? If you were divorced, there was no such thing as a divorce. You could not get divorced. If you were a woman who was widowed, you were kind of like an outcast of society, right? So like, we needed each other. And most importantly, women who bore children needed a man to protect her. She was not going to go out hunting overnight to get a deer while 9 months pregnant. That just was not happening. So since the role of women was to procreate the species, and it was the role of men to be the protectors and providers, it would make sense that we had this age-old dynamic dance. Okay, I go into much greater detail in my book. So I was watching this movie, and here's the story, but I was watching this movie, Tuck Everlasting. It's a Disney movie. It's an old Disney movie from like 2002. I never watched it, but it took place between, I want to say between the 1880s and the early 1900s. And I was just thinking about that concept. I was thinking about the concept of, in the early 1900s, like what women wore, what men wore. Like they barely had cars. They barely had, like I said, that infrastructure. If you lived in a rural town, like you had to wait till a covered wagon came in to bring you goods. You know, we didn't have the conveniences that we have today. So the dependency of women upon men made logical sense. Now, again, it doesn't excuse some of the behaviors, but it made logical sense. And so hence this dynamic dance was upon us, right? Was really upon us. And we both played into that dynamic dance. Now, when we look at that and go, it's only been about 124 years since we have had the ability to be self-sufficient, right? We're just talking about practical terms here. In all practical terms, we've only just had the ability to be self-sufficient. So before, like if you were living in Kansas on a farm and you were a woman, were you really going to do it all? Were you really going to grow all the crops and tend to the crops? And what happened in winter, right? So like I like your question. Okay. Hey, what's up? Good question. Good question. I'll address that in a minute. So when we think about that, we can't go back and just blame the patriarchy for being what it is, because for a really long time it worked, right? For a really long time it worked because we as human beings were not developed to the point of self-sufficiency. It's only very, 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 very recent. Okay. And even as recent as the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. So if you want to get really realistic about it, it's only been 75 years at that, which for the duration of humanity is not a very long time. So when we talk about the rising up of the feminine, the rising up of the divine feminine into prominence on a global scale, it has been shifting toward that for a very long time. It really has. And when we realize this, we no longer have to fight so hard to make it happen, because by natural law, it's actually happening. Okay. And again, I go into it a lot more in my book. So I'm going to look at some questions here. Really. Here we go. So Kia Ray said, can someone explain how a male could be DF and a female could be DM? And somebody else said, well, imagine what will be in 500 or 1,000 years. Yeah, and it's funny because I do think about the 500 versus 1,000 years. I think that, well, no, it is my hope that we are still wanting to be with each other and in communities and be stronger together, because we are stronger. I mean, humans are social animals. We're social creatures, but I feel like the way we're going is in the way of isolationism, which doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. I know we can, but should we? I guess is the bigger question. So the divine feminine versus divine masculine. Can men be divine feminines? Can women be divine masculines? The answer is yes, but here's the thing. The reason why that happens is because we have both, right? We have both energies. We possess masculine and feminine energies because we live in a world of duality. So everybody has both yin and yang energies. So it is absolutely positively possible. If we're talking about it in isolation as an individual, let's talk about it first as an individual. As an individual, you can possess more, like I'm a woman, as an individual, I could possess more masculine energy, and that would make me veer more toward that masculine energy. And if I am in an energy dynamic where I'm rising into my spiritual energy, yes, we could call that divine masculine, right? If there was a man who was possessing a little bit more on that yin yang scale, more feminine energy, it is just energy. It has nothing to do with the body. It has nothing to do with the gender. It just has to do with, like, on an energetic level, what that looks like. A man could definitely be a divine feminine. In the talk I was giving about the global scale, I was mostly referring to women as rising up into their feminine power and men rising up into their higher masculine power. And that's just to kind of explain globally what this shift is about and what this shift is going through in relation to what it has been up until present moment. I hope that makes sense. And if we're talking about twin flames, I know some of you mentioned twin flames. If we're talking about twin flames, that is an energy dynamic between two people, right? It was interesting because I mean, just full disclosure, I have a kid who's transgender who is now 30, and was born a female, transitioned to a male. But when that was happening, I was working during the time, it happened before, but I moved to California and I was working at Disneyland. And one interesting thing I noticed, because at that time there were a lot more gay, trans, okay, you name all the letters, okay? There were a lot of couples that would come to Disneyland who were same-sex couples. And I would just stand, observe, because it was my job to stand in the parks, but I would observe people as they were walking by. And it was so interesting. Do you know what I observed? Nearly 100% of the time in same-sex couples, on the eye observation, I don't know these people personally, but on the eye observation, what I noticed was one person in the couple presented themselves as more masculine, and one person in the same-sex couple presented themselves as more feminine. It was like this observation. It was really super interesting how I made this observation, how when we come together in a duo, if you will, that magnetic force that brings us together are opposites, right? Energetically, it's the opposites that bring us together. It's not the sameness that brings us together. It's the opposites that bring us together. So energetically, sure, in a couple, you're going to see one with more masculine energy, one with more feminine energy, but that doesn't mean that it's only that. Does that make sense? Someone just said, I'm confused as to how the energy doesn't correlate with gender, because obviously, yeah. So it usually does, Kia Ray, it usually does. And that's what I wrote in the book, is that in my coaching sessions, which I've coached now, God, since 2019, probably well over 1,000 women and men, but mostly on the twin flame journey. And what I do notice is that about 90%, not 100%, there's about 10% deviation to that, but about 90% are the same gender as the divine feminine, as the divine masculine, if that makes sense. So they're pretty gender specific. But again, that gets thrown out the door with the LGBTQ, what is it? Plus community. That gets thrown out the door, right? But when we talk about the twin flames, it's pretty high, it's a pretty high percentage where it's like females are divine feminine, males are divine masculine. About 10%, it's different. Okay. Mike said, yeah, I've noticed this with Ellen DeGeneres and her wife. Yeah, I mean, it seems to be very common. It's really, really common in same-sex couples, because it's just, they feel the energy dynamic of one feeling more in the masculine energy, one feeling more in the feminine energy, right? That's just the way it goes. It's because we live in a dualistic world, right? We live in a dualistic world. In this physical plane, it's all dualism. We have not yet transcended dualism, otherwise we'd be floating around in space. Just the fact that we have physical bodies means we live in a dualistic world. Okay. And I know we're getting super deep here. I've never intended to get this deep, but I appreciate you guys. I appreciate you so much for joining me and asking questions. That's what this chat with the author is all about, is these questions, having these conversations, understanding things a little bit better. I think this is really special because, especially for now, for like this dynamic into the higher feminine and the higher masculine, I think it's beautiful. This conversation is worthy. It's worthwhile. I feel like there are a lot of people today that are feeling discouraged and feeling downtrodden and feeling just depressed about the world at large. There is no need to be. There's absolutely no need to be. That the bigger global picture from a spiritual standpoint looks so much brighter and so much more peaceful and serene. And as long as you are choosing to be in your higher vibrational frequency for whatever energy you are feeling, that's all you need to do, is you stay in those high vibrations. It says, Hyoka Twin says, it has to do with the connection to the higher chakras. Yes, 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 yes. So, okay, I want to correct one thing. You said the DMs are more connected with the lower chakras. So that's really funny. I wrote a lot about this, the chakra system. I also wrote the book Chakra Healing for Vibrant Energy, but I talk about that specifically with the masculines who are operating from the lower chakras versus the higher chakras. And I would wager to say, by definition, okay, we're talking about divine masculine, right? By definition, a divine masculine is not operating in the lower chakras. By definition, right? Because by definition, a divine, listen to that word, a divine masculine is operating from the higher chakras, which are connected more to spirit. Okay. However, we are still integrated human beings with a mind, intellect, ego, personality, right? We have all that integration within us. And usually when a divine masculine or divine feminine are not operating out of integrity, it means that there is some unhealed business in the lower chakras. Does that make sense? It's not that they're living in the lower chakras. It's that there is unhealed business. There's lot going on there, right? There's a lot going on that is making people who are living in the lower vibrational frequencies, it's making them live in fear, right? Live in fear, live in their wounds, not balancing their own energies. And that's why you see the types of behavior that often are seen. Okay. Mike says, imagine having these conversations 50 to 100 years ago. Yeah, I would probably be hung for being a witch, right? That was like another thing. Yeah, I would be put in a mental hospital for sure. Yeah. Well, I don't know, because like Emerson lived 100 years ago, right? There were a lot of spiritual thinkers, not women though. Not women though. Let me keep saying that. There were a lot of spiritual forward thinkers 100 years ago. That's when so many great speakers were out there talking about this new spirituality, this new age spirituality, if you will, like Wallace D. Wattles, Napoleon Hill. That was 100 years ago. But none of them were women. They were all men. They were all men, right? So yes, as a woman speaking about this stuff, I probably would have been put in a mental hospital. You're right. Or hung. That's what I was surprised. So in 1908, they were still hanging people. And what I learned is that still in some states, it's still legal to hang people. I did not know that. That's crazy. That's all from watching a movie, right? But I was like, wait a minute. 1908, it was still legal to hang people? Crazy. And they were like public hangings, right? It's crazy. So wait, did you know, and I say this at every video that I talk about the divine feminine and how far we've come as like women in having rights, that it wasn't until 1975 in the United States that women were allowed to have a bank account or a credit card without a father or a husband co-signing. 1975. Isn't that crazy? That is so crazy. I really appreciate you guys for being here. So if you head on over to my website, michellefondinauthor.com, and sign up for my Empowering Thoughts newsletter, which I will be doing more of. I kind of dropped off. I'm writing a new book. So I haven't been doing my blog as often, but you can, if you live in the US, I can send it abroad. It's just super expensive to send abroad. But you guys get a paperback copy of one person who signs up for the newsletter. I'll put the names in a hat. And then next week, I will draw someone to win a copy, a signed author signed copy of the Empowered Divine Feminine in paperback version. And if you live in the US, I will send that along to you. So gosh, thank you so much for your questions. I really super appreciate you guys for being here. Thank you for subscribing to my channel below. Thanks for checking out all my courses. And hey, if you're interested, book a reading with me. I appreciate you guys. Have a wonderful, fabulous week, and I'll see you guys real soon. Bye.